Greetings, AP European History Scholars. This is your test review for Unit 10 on Imperialism up to World War I. Looking at the review sheet here from top to bottom, the context of the new imperialism, and remember the redesigned AP history tests want you to put the question in the context of what's going on at the same time. Two thoughts on the new imperialism, and that is this is taking place during the period of industrialization or the Second Industrial Revolution, which is enabling the European powers to project power through steamships and through advanced weaponry. And once you get there to wherever that is, you're taking over Asians, taking over Africans, you can bind your empires together with telegraphs and with railroads. Another context is nationalism. You have the rise of nation states, and in particular Germany, and you have the desire to have strength and respect and power that is perceived to depend upon owning overseas colonies vis-a-vis your neighbors. You want to be a player. You want to have a place in the sun. How different from how the new imperialism was different from earlier imperialism in the 1600s? Well, there's a lot of similarities. There's the seeking of control as a way of winning, national rivalry against your enemies. You have the seeking of resources and markets. You have this idea of a civilizing mission, spreading Christianity in particular. The big difference here, though, is the second wave of imperialism is really one of much vaster scope. There's a lot more areas, a lot more colonies, greater depth away from coastal areas, and you have less settlement of European populations and more focus on control of resources and markets. So the second or new imperialism here it's one of scope, one of dimension, and also one focusing more on markets and resources, less on actual colonial settlement of large numbers of immigrants. Justifications for imperialism: you have military need for bases, need for coaling stations, need to protect your colonies, the desire for resources, the desire for a market to sell to, the goal of civilizing those lesser peoples and bringing them to Christ, bringing them the Christian faith, and certainly the notion of prestige, of having that place in the sun, of having the respect of your neighbors in Europe because you have colonies, you have empire. Ideas that led to imperialism: well, one big one here is social Darwinism, that there are some people who are lesser, who are less developed, who are less educated, who are less civilized, and who need such civilizing. And this is often a rationalization, but it is something which the Europeans use to justify what they're doing. Lenin's view on imperialism: Lenin said that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. Basically, when the capitalists run out of proletariat to exploit, they'll go overseas and they'll exploit people in other areas around the world. So this is the end result of exploitation. To diffuse the pressure that's building up in your own country, you go abroad and you take other people over and you exploit them. How did all of this contribute to European tensions? This competition overseas led to resentment, led to argument over various borders overseas, and this is one of those factors that will be leading up to the tensions that lead to World War I. 1885 Berlin Congress. This is a meeting of the European powers to discuss by what criteria constitutes control over an area of colonization. What constitutes a presence? How many people, how long, are you really in control of this area? The white man's burden: this is a famous phrase from Rudyard Kipling, and it refers to the idea that the African is primitive and benighted and in need of civilizing and protection and Christianization, and that this is a good thing, this is a compassionate thing, that the English and certainly other Europeans are helping out their fellow man. Arguments against imperialism: that it is expensive, that it might lead to war against other countries. Certainly Otto von Bismarck was an opponent of overseas colonization before he was forced out in 1890. there is kind of interesting, the flip side of social Darwinism justifying you taking over Africans and Asians. There's racism would be an argument not to do this, to stay away from these people whose blood will just corrupt the English race, and who might demand things which they're not due. So racism is an argument to stay away from these lesser peoples. And then there's the very rare argument that this whole thing is unjust. Bismarck's attitude towards imperialism was to stay out of conflict abroad. He believed in protecting Germany's interior borders, and he believed in making European alliances that would avoid enemies on two fronts. Germany must never be in the position of fighting a two-front war. So he's focusing on a continental policy, and when he's pushed out by Wilhelm II, Wilhelm's going to be pursuing more of a global policy, as it were. The sick man of Europe is the Ottoman Empire. After, in 1908, you have the Bosnian crisis, where Austria-Hungary grabs Bosnia and Herzegovina from the Ottomans, and then you have the First and Second Balkan Wars, 1912, 1913, where territory is taken at the expense of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire has just been, over the last century or so, been pushed back, pushed out of Romania, pushed out of Hungary, being pushed farther and farther out of the Balkans. And this is going to lead to this crisis where the Serbians, who want access to the Adriatic Sea, they are being blocked by the Austrian control of Bosnia, which they had taken earlier in 1908. And you have this famous event, 1914, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who's on a goodwill tour of an Austrian province, Bosnia here, is going to be assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, who is a member of the Black Hand. This is a Serbian terrorist organization, a nationalist organization, angry that the Austrians are blocking their movement west. Remember, Bosnia is perhaps a third or so Serbian. It has a large Serbian population. So the Serbs are one of these Balkan groups that believe that their destiny, their right, is to move into, the Serbs believe the right is to move into Bosnia, and that Austria is unjustly squatting on their land. How the alliance system propelled Europe towards World War I. Remember that countries drew other countries in because of alliances into war, or countries felt emboldened because they were backed by allies. And Austria, when they attack Serbia, this brings Russia into the war. Russia, remember, is the defender of the little Slavic nations, their Slavic brethren, this idea of Pan-Slavism. Germany fears both an attack on its flanks by France and Russia. This leads to a preemptive strike, that Schlieffen Plan, through Belgium into France. And attacking Belgium brings England in. So you have this sort of domino effect where countries attacking other countries bring other countries in. And Austria's concerns in the Balkans is to control Bosnia against Serbian aggression. And Austria, remember, has this fear. There's these multiple nationalities within the Austrian Empire, within the dual monarchy, and there's the fear that if one piece peels off, other pieces will perhaps be pulled off in the centrifugal collapse of Austria, which it does fear, and which will happen at the end of the war and the settlement at Versailles in 1919. Russian concerns in the Balkans. Russia, again, is the defender of other Slavic nations, Orthodox countries like Serbia, and Russia has always had this concern of control over the straits, control from the access from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. German interest in a strong Austria. Germany really only has one significant ally, and that is Austria-Hungary. So if Austria is weak, if Austria can be pushed around by this little country Serbia, which offs the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, then Germany is essentially alone. So Germany's going to be giving Austria sort of a blank check to put the Serbs in their place. And this is really that catalyst, that trigger that sets into motion the events that lead to a continental war. Significant European emperors, you should know Wilhelm II or William II, Nicholas of Germany, Nicholas II of Russia, and Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary. Women during World War I, what were they doing? The AP is a lot of feminist history drives the questions. Women were nurses. Women took men's places and factories and on the farm and in government. Women worked in relief. There were 100,000 women joined the British Army Auxiliary units, namely the WACs, which is kind of similar to the American name in World War II, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. The women in Great Britain will be pushing still for the right to vote in this war to protect democracy against tyrannical German militarism. And in 1918, British women will get the right to vote if they're over 30 years old. By 1928, this will lead to the right to vote of those over 21 years. And it's been noted that one of the effects of women is a lot of women are sort of doomed to singleness. 750,000 British soldiers die, and this is just in Britain alone. That's 9% of the population under age 45. So a certain number of the population of women will be single. Belgium and the Schlieffen Plan. Remember, France has this plan to push the majority, the largest, Germany has this plan to put the largest number of soldiers through Belgium into France. The goal is to capture Paris, knock France out of the war, and then sort of pull back these soldiers to blunt a coming Russian attack, which they rightly judge to be sort of slow in arriving, since Russian railways are much more primitive at that end of Germany. So it's the sneak attack of France through Belgium and through Luxembourg. Triple Entente is the alliance. This is what we would call as Americans the Allies, not to be confused with the Triple Alliance. The Entente is the alliance between France, Russia, and Great Britain. The Triple Alliance is between Italy, Germany, and Austria-Hungary, and Italy pulls out early in the war. So the Triple Alliance is synonymous with the Central Powers, Austria-Hungary and Germany. The Russian Revolution, 1917, why now and not between 1914 and 1916? Why doesn't this revolution take place in the early years of the war? Well, basically what happens is the Russian military effort is a series of disastrous military defeats, just countless dead, food shortages, hunger, food riots, and the revolution takes place in 1917. It's led by a revolt of soldiers who refuse to go to the front, and there's food riots in St. Petersburg. This will lead to the abdication of the Tsar. And it's important to know here that there's, in a sense, two revolutions in 1917. This first revolution sees the abdication of the Tsar, and a 6-month provisional democratic government takes over, led by a gentleman named Alexander Kerensky. And his great mistake, the mistake of the provisional government, is keeping Russia in a losing war. And this will lead 6 months later to a revolt of the Bolsheviks, of the communists led by Vladimir Lenin. And this revolt will be successful, and one of the things Lenin will do is he will pull Russia out of the war. He'll sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with the Germans, surrendering about a quarter of the Russian Empire, that eastern part, which would be Poland, Ukraine, that area, to the Germans. Now, the Germans will have to surrender this when they sign Versailles in 1919. But Russia is losing the war, and this war has become very unpopular. People are hungry. There's food riots. This is why there's a Russian Revolution. Wilson's 14 points. This is Wilson's peace plan. It's very idealistic. It's a peace supposedly without victors, without revenge. It's very naive, of course, because there's a lot of revenge exacted in the Treaty of Versailles. The capstone of Wilson's 14 points is a League of Nations. The Treaty of Versailles, and why did it lead to World War I and not lead to peace? Well, it was very vindictive. There was quite a lot of revenge, retribution here. Article 231 had Germany had to take responsibility for the war. The Germans had to pay reparations in today it would be the hundreds of billions of dollars. They lost Alsace and Lorraine back to France. They lost the Malmedy area to Belgium. They lost the output of the Saar coal mines in Germany to France for 15 years. They had to cede land. What was once Germany now becomes part of modern new Czechoslovakia and Poland. Grand total of 7 million Germans are now outside of German borders in these new states. Germany itself is divided into the main part Germany and East Prussia, with this Polish corridor dividing Germany so that Poland has access to the sea at Danzig. Germany loses all their colonies. Germany is limited. It goes from this multi-million man army down to only 100,000, sort of like a national constabulary. There are naval limits, very severe restrictions on what was once the second largest navy in the world. The Rhine is demilitarized. The size and number of the army in armaments is restricted, and Germany is not allowed to have an air force. So all of these things combined, and there's the internationalization of German rivers. There's this huge humiliation that's dumped on the Germans. And the irony here, I have on the review sheet, the irony is none of the war is ever fought in Germany. So Germany is going to feel that somehow they've been betrayed. They've been stabbed in the back, and this is going to lead to this argument, the scapegoating of Jews and the wealthy and munitions makers. There's these bad guys, and of course, you're more familiar with the Jews and the rise to Hitler in the years to come. Balance of power, the contrast here with the 1815 Congress of Vienna is that the Treaty of Versailles of 1919, 20 years later, Germany is going to be, remilitarized and invading Poland September 1, 1939, whereas for almost 100 years after the Congress of Vienna meets after Napoleon's exile to St. Helena, Europe is largely peaceful. You've got these revolts of 1830 and the revolutions of 1848, and you have the Franco-Prussian War, but these are nothing along the scope of the wars that preceded Napoleon, the Napoleonic Wars, the wars of the French Revolution, and the Austrian and Spanish Wars of Succession. These wars saw hundreds of thousands, if not millions, die, and the Congress of Vienna recognizes the need for a future balance of power, and one thing they do is they restore the Bourbon monarchy to France, and France is brought into the concert of Europe. France, who had just been defeated, is treated with respect, is treated with recognition that because of their size, because of their population, they will always be if they're not a friend, if they're not placated, if they don't feel they've been treated well, they could be an enemy. So France doesn't stomp around Europe like Napoleon had done, and you have the Congress of Vienna achieving peace where Versailles fails. And the balance of power, remember, is this idea that you're trying to take into account the needs, the interests of many countries for the sake of long-term stability and peace. And Versailles Treaty just totally ignored German interests and rubbed salt into the wounds and sort of rubbed their face into the ground. The U.S. and the League of Nations, the U.S. Army pulls out almost immediately at the end of the war here. And the U.S., even though Wilson pushed for this League of Nations, we do not join the League of Nations. So we become isolationist in the 1920s and 30s. So there's some thoughts here on the test that's coming up. This is looking at your review sheet. Study hard, study well, study smart. See you on test day. Bye.